Welcome to the His Eternal Word podcast. I am your host, Rakeyia Collins, and the purpose of this podcast is to read the Bible from beginning to end every single year. If that mission sounds interesting to you, I'd encourage you to grab your Bible and read along with me. On today's episode, we are going to be reading from Genesis 29 up until Genesis 31. And we're going to be reading out of the English Standard Version. So Genesis 29. Then Jacob went on his journey and came to the land of the people of the east. As he looked, he saw a well in the field, and behold, 3 flocks of sheep lying beside it. For out of the well the flocks were watered. The stone on the well's mouth was large, and when all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone from the mouth of the well and water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place over the mouth of the well. Jacob said to them, "My brothers, where do you come from?" They said, "We are from Haran." He said to them, "Do you know Laban the son of Nahor?" They said, "We know him." He said to them, "Is it well with him?" They said, "It is well, and see, Rachel his daughter is coming with the sheep." He said, "Behold, it is still high day. It is not time for the livestock to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go pasture them." But they said, "We cannot until all the flocks are gathered together and the stone is rolled from the mouth of the well. Then we water the sheep." While he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. Now, as soon as Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, her mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, Jacob came near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and wept aloud. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's kinsman and that he was Rebekah's son, and she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. Then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were weak, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Jacob loved Rachel, and he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. Laban gave his female servant Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her servant. And in the morning, behold, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve with you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" Laban said, "It is not so done in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week with this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me another 7 years." Jacob did so and completed her week. Then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his female servant Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her servant. So Jacob went in to Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah, and served Laban for another 7 years. Jacob's children. When the Lord saw that Leah was hated, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. And Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called him Reuben, for she said, "Because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me." She conceived again and bore a son and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also." And she called his name Simeon. Again she conceived and bore a son and said, "Now this time my husband will be attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Therefore his name was called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son and said, "This time I will praise the Lord." Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she ceased bearing. So chapter 29, I want to go back to the very beginning of the chapter, more so just to kind of set the frame and then dive into my points. So we see that at this point, Jacob is going towards his mother's brother's country because he was sent away, because at that point Esau has a strong hate towards him and wants to kill him. So now he's journeying and he comes across these shepherds and their sheep, and they are with their flocks and they have an exchange. And then Jacob ends up looking up and seeing Rachel, and he knows it's Rachel because the men that are with him have told him, "Hey, that's Rachel." And so Rachel they have an exchange, Jacob and Rachel, and then Rachel takes Jacob back to the house with Laban. And this is where my first point comes in. We see that Laban asks Jacob, "Well, what do you want? Like, you're not going to just serve me for nothing." Jacob says that he wants Rachel because he loves Rachel and that's who he wants to be with. The Bible makes it clear to us that Laban has 2 daughters. One is older and her name is Leah, and Jacob has a love for Rachel. The Bible says nothing about his emotion or his affection towards Leah at all. So when we jump down to verses 21 through really 28, this is where we see that the trickery that Jacob has isn't his own. Up until now in the chapters of Genesis, we've seen, especially when we think about Isaac and we think about his family line, we think about Abraham, there has been a tendency for trickery and telling half-truths and not being completely honest. And we see here that Jacob gets it from his uncle as well, because his uncle does the same thing. His uncle tricks Jacob into sleeping with the older sister. And the older sister is Leah, the one that, again, the Bible never clearly calls out that Jacob loves her, has an affection for her, or anything like that. We know for sure that Jacob loves Rachel. And so it's something that runs in their family line, the deceit and the dishonesty. Since Jacob has been tricked, we see that he still, because of his love for Rachel, decides that he's going to stick around and he's going to continue to serve Laban another 7 years. So a total of 14 years is what he has been serving Laban, really for Rachel. He thought that he was going to get Rachel within the first 7 years, but he ended up getting Leah. So in totality, he ends up serving Laban 14 years just for Rachel. That is first of all, let's just talk about, that is some type of love. That is some strong love. And then we get into verses 31 through the end until we get to chapter 30, where we see that because God saw that Leah was hated, he opened up her womb and Rachel was barren. I want to kind of walk through Leah's mindset around her kids. So we see that in verse 32, Leah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Reuben. And she said, "Because the Lord has looked upon my affliction, for now my husband will love me." Verse 33, she conceived again and bore a son and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also." Verse 34, again she conceived and bore a son and said, "Now this time my husband will be attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Verse 35, and she conceived again and bore a son and said, "This time I will praise the Lord." The call out that I want to make to modern times is that a child will not make a man love you. It's just not. Using a child in that manner to try to force an adult who has their own mind, their own will, their own emotions, and trying to force them to love you and thinking of your child in that manner, it's just not healthy. And I wouldn't be calling this out if it wasn't so clearly stated in the Bible by Leah's words that this is how she's seeing her value. And this is because she's in a very loveless marriage. She is looking at her children as, okay, now my husband has to love me because I'm bringing him children. He has to look upon me with some sort of favor. But to our knowledge, at least up until this point, we haven't gotten into chapter 30 or 31 yet, but the Bible still doesn't say that Jacob's affection changed towards Leah and now he all of a sudden loves Leah. It doesn't say that. It never says he actually loved her in chapter 29. But again, I wanted to specifically make this call out because it is important as women that we don't look at children as a pawn to win the affection of a man. Your children are more than that. They are gifts from God. And we see that in verse 35, this time I will praise the Lord. She finally gets it. She finally gets that it's time for me to shift my focus to praising the Lord versus looking at these children as a way to have my husband form this attachment towards me. And not to bash Leah, it has to be hard. It has to be hard to want to be loved and to want to be married to someone and to want them to want you the same way you want them, and they don't. So I'm not saying that Leah is the worst, that she's crazy. All I'm saying is that the principle is we shouldn't look at our children that way. We shouldn't look at our children as pawns that are going to allow us to get things that we want. We should look at our children as the gift from God that they truly are. Chapter 30. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children or I shall die." Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in the place of God who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Then she said, "Here is my servant Bilhah. Go into her so that she may give birth on my behalf, so that even I may have children through her." So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, "God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son." Therefore she called his name Dan. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, "With mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed." So she called her name Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son, and Leah said, "Good fortune has come." So she called his name Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, and Leah said, "Happy am I, for women have called me happy." So she called his name Asher. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." But she said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" Rachel said, "Then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes." When Jacob came out from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." So he lied with her that night. And God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, "God has given me my wages because I gave my servant to my husband." So she called his name Issachar. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my husband will honor me because I have borne him 6 sons. So she called his name Zebulun. Afterward, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, saying, May the Lord add to me another son. Jacob's prosperity. As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, Send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given you. But Laban said to him, If I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages and I will give it. Jacob said to him, You yourself know how I have served you and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also? He said, What shall I give you? Jacob said, You shall not give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. Let me pass through all your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb and the spotted and speckled goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages with you. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. Laban said, Good, let it be as you have said. But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black. And he put them in charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled the white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places where the flocks came to drink. And since they breed when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks. And so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped, and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put them in his own droves apart, and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in front of the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly, and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. So, starting from the top of chapter 30, we're just going to dive into the commentary. It is frustrating and just really speaks to the human experience of it all, to see Rachel getting angry with Jacob over her not being able to have a son. It just shows the fact that as humans, we can get upset and annoyed by things that are not within someone else's control. That is truly something that God has the jurisdiction over. And you can see that Jacob was mad with her. Like, why are you getting upset with me? Because you're unable to have children. And I would say the better response ideally would have been for Jacob to be understanding about his wife's frustration, because that is a very frustrating position to be in at that point, to want something so bad and not be able to get it. And as a result of that, we see that Rachel does what Sarah did with Abraham, and she basically gives her servant to Jacob to sleep with and to have children on Rachel's behalf. However, we see here that Rachel's servant had 2 kids by Jacob. It's sad because it's like the servants are women who have their own rights, their own minds, their own bodies, and they're being used as property, essentially the same way that Rachel and Leah were used as property and bargaining chips from Laban. It just really speaks to the thematic tone of the times in which the word was written, that it was really a patriarchal society, and that not only did men see women as objects, but it was so pervasive in the culture that now you have women seeing women as objects as well, to be able to just accomplish their own personal goals. If we zoom out just a little bit and go down to a few verses, we'll see verse 14 really through verse 16, where we see that Leah's son went out and got some mandrakes, and he came back and gave them to his mother. And now we see that Leah and Rachel are having an exchange where Rachel's like, hey, can I have some of your son's mandrakes? To which Leah responds and says, no, is it not a small thing that you took my husband from me? And as humans, it's one of those things where we are very predictable. When something, especially as a woman, when something is on your heart, it'll be the slightest provocation, because the mandrakes had nothing to do with Jacob. They had nothing to do with nothing. But the fact that was really on Leah's heart to say to her sister is why she said it. And just as hopefully some guidance for you guys, don't be that person. If there's something on your heart that you want to say to someone, you should just say it. You shouldn't wait for an opportunity to say it. You should just vocalize your concerns, because then it comes out in a sentence like this where we're talking about mandrakes and now we're talking about husbands. And Rachel's response isn't any better. She responds and says, well, you can have him for the night for the mandrakes. So now they're just passing Jacob around. It's just a very interesting family dynamic, but frustrating that, again, as humans leading our own separate lives, left to our own devices and our own wills, this is the best that we can come up. Hopping down a few verses from verse 37 to 43, we see that at this point, Jacob and Laban have had an exchange, and Jacob is now getting his own goats and his own lambs, and they're going to be speckled and they're going to be spotted. And God is blessing him by allowing the stronger ones that are producing, they're going to come out in a way that favors what Jacob has stated, and he's going to be able to keep them and have them as his own. And so it's definitely a very interesting family dynamic. And as we get into chapter 31 here, we'll be able to see how it continues to be a very interesting family dynamic. So chapter 31, Jacob flees from Laban. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's, he has gained all this wealth. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, I see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times, but God did not permit him to harm me. If he said, the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. If he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats that mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Then the angel of the Lord said to me in the dream, Jacob, and I said, here I am. And he said, lift up your eyes and see, all the goats that mate with the flocks are striped, spotted, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed a pillar and made a vow to me. Now arise, go out from this land and return to the land of your kindred. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house? Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he has sold us, and he has indeed devoured our money. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that that he had gained and the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Paddan-aram to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Laban had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole her father's household gods. And Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. He fled with all that he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates, and he set his face toward the hill of Gilead. When it was told to Laban on the third day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, "Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad." And Laban overtook Jacob. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched tents in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword? Why did you flee secretly and trick me and did not tell me so that I might have sent you away with myrrh and songs with tambourine and lyre? And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your fathers spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad.' And now you have gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods?" Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force. Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours and take it." Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. So Laban went into Jacob's tent and Leah's tent and into the 2 female servants, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, "Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of women is upon me." So he searched, but did not find the household gods. Then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, "What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For you have felt through all my goods. What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us 2. These 20 years I have been with you. Your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flocks. What was born by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. There I was by day, the heat consumed me, and the cold by night, and my sleep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night." Then Laban answered and said to Jacob, "The daughters are my daughters, the children are my children, the flocks are my flocks, and all that you see is mine. But what can I do this day for these my daughters or for their children whom they have borne? Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, "Gather stones." And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap, called it Gerar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." Therefore he named it Gilad and Mizpah, for he said, "The Lord watch between you and me when we are out of one another's sight. If you oppress my daughters, or if you take wives besides my daughters, although no one is with us, see, God is witness between you and me." Then Laban said to Jacob, "See this heap and the pillar, which I have set between you and me. This heap is a witness, and the pillar is a witness, that I will not pass over this heap to you, and you will not pass over this heap and this pillar to me to do harm." The God of Abraham and the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us. So Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac, and Jacob offered a sacrifice in the hill country and called his kinsmen to eat bread. They ate bread and spent the night in the hill country. Early in the morning, Laban arose and kissed his grandchildren and his daughters and blessed them. And Laban departed and returned home. There's not much commentary for chapter 31. I think it lays itself out very well. We see that Jacob and Laban finally come to terms with the fact that they need to treat one another better. Ultimately, they were tricking each other, going back and forth with the trickery. It seems over the past 20 years or so, it's been revealed to us that Jacob's wages have been changed 10 times. Just do right, especially by your family. If I had to say one thematic thing that is just continuing to rise to the surface as we learn more about this family, just do right by your family. Do right by those that you know and that you love, because it's not worth it. As you can see, so much hurt comes from when you spend time with someone and you are there for them and they just do you wrong time and time again. You can see the fact that in verse 36, Jacob became angry and berated Laban. He was frustrated, and this was supposed to be family. So if there's nothing else that you get from these chapters so far, continue to do right by those that you love and those that you know, especially your family members, but just in general, do right by people and be kind. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that you found some value out of this content. If you did, please leave me a rating or review wherever you are listening. This would mean the world to me. I'd also love to hear from you on social media. Please feel free to reach out on Twitter at His Eternal Word, 1. And also please feel free to reach out to me on Instagram as well at His Eternal Word. Visit our website at www.hiseternalword.com, and I hope you stay tuned for the next episode.